Diesel hit $2.76 a liter on April 13, 2026. That was the national average reported by globalpetrolprices.com. In many regional and rural areas, the figure at the bowser has been higher still, sitting above $3 per liter through much of March and April. For Australian farmers, that number is breaking the maths of their businesses. The cost of production on farms in Western Australia has at least doubled in a matter of weeks. A quarter of WA vegetable growers have already stopped planting. Grain farmers are rationing fuel to get through half their winter sowing program, not the full one. And the National Farmers Federation has warned that food price hikes of up to 50% are possible if the diesel shortage disrupts planting, harvesting, and distribution. Truck operators face their own pressure, with reports suggesting up to 70% could struggle without relief. This is the number that now matters for the farmer ordering fuel to start winter sowing, for the dairy processor moving milk, for the trucking company hauling grain, and for the household filling a supermarket trolley. Some context shapes the rest of the story. Australian agriculture used 2,225 megaliters of diesel in 2019, according to a NSW Department of Primary Industries report. That accounts for more than 80% of agricultural energy use nationally. Whether you run a cropping operation or a cattle property, diesel is not an optional input. It is the input. CommBank agriculture economist Denis Voznesensky put it plainly. Without diesel, farm businesses cannot survive. So when the price roughly doubles in weeks, everything on the farm moves with it. Here is how the price got to $2.76. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission's weekly monitoring report tracked retail diesel averaging 275.7 cents per litre across the 5 largest cities on March 18th, an increase of 35.4 cents in a single week. 7 days later, on March 25th, Canberra recorded the highest capital city daily average at 306 cents a litre. Perth, the lowest of the 8 cities monitored that day, was still above 300 cents. By April 13th, the national average sat at 2.76 per litre, with many regional stations still charging above $3. Underlying that retail number is an even sharper move in the wholesale cost. Freight firm TFB Trading reported the base fuel cost per litre rose from 183 cents on March 30th to approximately 256 cents by April 13th, a roughly 40% increase in 2 weeks. Without the federal excise reduction that took effect on April 1st, TFB Trading calculated that retail diesel would be approaching 375 cents per litre. Oil markets moved sharply during this period. Brent crude, the benchmark most relevant to Australian imports, broke above $100 a barrel in early March for the first time in 4 years, and at one point in April traded near $109. Asian spot cargoes for immediate delivery reportedly reached $140 a barrel. The cost of landing refined diesel in Australia moved with that benchmark. The warnings came early, and they came from inside the industry. On March 9th, ahead of the full-price surge, WAFarmers Federation Chief Executive Trevor Whittington described rising panic across the wheat belt, saying the situation was like a wheat belt recession has started. He reported flow-on effects across machinery sales, servicing, trucking, and regional stores as farmers cut spending. Diesel in WA at that point had moved from around $1.80 a litre to over $3 inside a month. The WA harvest that hangs on the current winter sowing window is valued at around $7 billion. On March 31st, the National Farmers Federation issued a public statement after National Cabinet's fuel meeting. NFF President Hamish McIntyre acknowledged national coordination had begun but said the halving of the fuel excise does little directly for farmers. He pointed out that most farm diesel is used off-road through equipment like tractors, headers, and spray rigs, and that farmers already claim excise back through the fuel tax credit scheme. A retail pump reduction does not change their net position. On April 9th, TasFarmers published an editorial warning that at around $3.20 a litre, diesel stops being a line item and becomes the dominant cost of production. Every tractor pass, every ton moved to processors, every input delivered to farm, it all compounds. On April 10th, CommBank's agri-economist flagged that fuel was the immediate pressure on farmers, with nitrogen fertilizer supply not far behind. With those warnings in place, farmers began making decisions. In York, Western Australia, brothers Aaron and Adrian Emin started seeding this year's program of around 8,000 hectares of canola, barley, wheat, and oats. They told the West Australian they had only enough fuel to get through half that program. Adrian Emin said that without debt to service, the family would have simply sat the year out. Across the vegetable sector in WA, Vegetables WA Chief Executive Peter Spackman reported that around 25% of producers had already stopped planting due to cost and uncertainty. In Carnarvon, banana growers already coping with the aftermath of Cyclone Mitchell, which wiped out 50% of fruit the previous month, faced additional unsustainable cost pressure from diesel and freight. In Lismore, New South Wales, Norco dairy producer Andrew Wilson, a fourth-generation dairyman from Woodlawn, said his coastal farm faced an extra $100,000 in winter sowing costs as a direct result of the crisis. That is not an estimate of annual operating costs. That is the sowing bill. This is the cause and effect chain that matters. Diesel doubles. Input costs on every farm rise. Farms reduce planted area, delay operations, or miss the winter sowing window altogether. Crop volumes fall. Freight costs rise on top of that. Retail grocery prices move upward with a lag of weeks to months. The household buying bread, meat, and vegetables pays the final bill. The knock-on to livestock is direct. Norco Chief Executive Michael Hampson told Land that diesel has doubled, fertilizer has jumped 300%. He added that freight in some cases had risen by 50%. Australia was approximately 1 million tons short of fertilizer, and cereal growers facing dry conditions were likely to produce smaller crops, meaning less feed available for dairy cows. So the cost shock moves from diesel to fertilizer to grain to dairy, and on to the supermarket milk aisle. Freight operators facing this cost environment have passed charges on. Bean Growers Australia, for example, applied an extraordinary fuel levy surcharge on its freight-inclusive pricing effective April 13th. In remote and regional Australia, the ACCC has been examining surcharges applied by multiple distributors, with some running above 70%. The ACCC moved to a weekly monitoring cycle during the crisis. On March 19th, it announced an investigation into allegations of anti-competitive conduct on diesel availability in regional and rural Australia. On April 2nd, it sent substantiation notices to businesses across South Australia, Western Australia, Queensland, and the Northern Territory that had imposed sizable fuel surcharges. ACCC Chair Gina Cass-Gottlieb said the regulator had received complaints about surcharges of more than 70% on small businesses servicing remote communities. The regulator's info center logged over 3,000 fuel-related reports in March alone. From April 1st, the federal excise on petrol and diesel was halved for 3 months to 20.6 cents per liter on a fully indexed basis. The heavy vehicle road user charge was also cut to zero for the same 3-month period. Across the 5 largest capital cities, retail diesel dropped around 15 cents a liter day on day when the cut took effect. For motorists, this was real relief. For farmers using diesel off-road, analysis from Grant Thornton noted the excise cut delivers no net benefit because the fuel tax credit rate adjusts down by the same amount. That is why industry leaders distinguish between consumer relief and farm relief. The excise cut is the former, is not the latter. Private sector responses have started to appear at the processor level. Norco, the 100% farmer-owned dairy cooperative, announced its Farmgate milk price would rise 5 cents a liter from May 1st, taking the rate to 97 cents per liter, and adding roughly $1 million a month to producer returns. French-owned processor Lactalis announced a matching 5-cent increase, taking the weighted average milk price to $9.69 per kilogram of milk solids, up from $9.05. Woolworths lifted its Farmers' Own brand price by 10 cents a liter for a limited group of premium producers. WAFarmers, the owner of Bunnings, Kmart, and Target, paused delivery fees on eligible orders through September to ease pressure on customers. Qantas cut domestic flight capacity 5% and flagged jet fuel costs of $3.1 to $3.3 billion for the half year. Farmers themselves are looking further ahead. At a recent CommBank Agri event, producers discussed the longer-term case for AG Tech, virtual fencing, in-paddock weighing, and selective electrification. None of those solutions removes diesel dependence in the short term. None replaces a tractor at seeding. But they are part of the conversation about reducing exposure to future fuel shocks. The ABARES March 2026 outlook frames the sector context. Gross value of Australian agricultural production is forecast at a record $101.4 billion in 2025-26, before falling 6% to $95 billion in 2026-27. Wheat production value is forecast to fall 13%. Beef and live cattle export value is forecast to fall 18%. The ABARES Sale Yard Indicator Price, a benchmark for cattle, is forecast to decline 9% to average 705 cents per kilogram carcass weight in 2026-27. Beef production is forecast to fall 6% to 2.6 million tons carcass weight. ABARES also warns autumn 2026 rainfall is likely to be below average for most of the southern half of Australia. That outlook was compiled with information largely current to February 21st, before the current crisis fully escalated. The fuel shock is not reflected in those numbers. That is where things stand today. The Strait of Hormuz, the global choke point that carries roughly a fifth of the world's seaborne oil trade, was reclosed on April 18th. Oil markets remain volatile. Brent crude sits near $95 a barrel, elevated above pre-crisis levels. In Australia, national average diesel is $2.76 a litre. Regional and rural prices sit higher, and the federal excise relief is scheduled to expire on June 30th. The heavy vehicle road user charge relief expires with it. Farmers are in the winter sowing window now. Decisions on how much crop to plant, how much fertilizer to apply, how much fuel to forward buy are being made this week and next. The Emin brothers in York have enough fuel for half their program. A quarter of WA vegetable growers have stopped planting. Dairy producers in Northern Rivers, New South Wales are carrying additional sowing bills in the tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. The consequences of those decisions will flow through grain tonnage in spring, livestock supply through the year, and through grocery prices on Australian shelves. The price at the pump was the first visible number. Is not the last number households will see. Subscribe.